Let me read to you a passage from the 15th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 18 to 21. It's the Gospel for Saturday after the 5th Sunday of Easter. St. John writes, Jesus said to his disciples, "If the world hates you, keep in mind that it hated me first. If you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. That is why the world hates you. Remember the words I spoke to you. No servant is greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will persecute you also. If they obeyed my teaching, they will obey yours also. They will treat you this way because of my name, for they do not know the one who sent me." That's from John chapter 15, verses 18 to 21. Our Lord refers to his choosing his disciples out of this world. You know, Friedrich Engels, who lived from 1820 to 1895, was a German-born English industrialist, a political and social philosopher who hammered out Marxist theory alongside Karl Marx. At the age of 25, he published his The Condition of the Working Class in England, first in German and a few decades later in English in 1887, based on his personal observation and research in a certain part of England. 3 years later, in 1848, he co-authored with Marx the Communist Manifesto. After Marx's death in 1883, he organized many of Marx's notes and published them as the 4th chapter of his friend's Das Kapital. It seems that in religious persuasion, Engels embraced an idea of modern pantheism, a merging of divinity with progressing humanity. In one of his last letters, he wrote that the Hegelian idea of God has already become mine, and thus I am joining the ranks of the modern pantheists. Both he and Marx viewed religion as the worst of distractions from the important business of making the world a better place. Famously, Marx wrote that religion is the opium of the people. Of course, a certain kind of religious life and attitude can take a person away from concern for the world. The thought of this brings us to our gospel passage I read earlier from John chapter 15, verse 18 to 21, in which our Lord says to his disciples that if you belonged to the world, it would love you as its own. As it is, you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world. Is Jesus Christ then taking his disciples out of the world in the sense condemned by Engels and his famous friend Karl Marx? Indeed not. The depiction of religion by Marxist thought is a hopeless caricature. Consider a couple of examples of those whom Christ chose out of the world and who did not belong to it. They are drawn from the misery of war, modern war. Father Franz Stock was a German army chaplain to Paris prisoners of the Nazis. Born in 1904, he was ordained a priest in 1932 by the Archbishop of Paderborn. In 1940, he was appointed as priest for Germans in Paris, and the following year began work in the Paris prisons. The jails of Paris during 1941 to 1944 held approximately 11,000 prisoners, and Father Stock worked mightily for them, especially for those condemned to execution. After the liberation, and now himself a prisoner of war. He led a prison seminary for German students of theology captured during the war. When in 1947 it was closed, 949 lecturers, priests, brothers and seminarists had been at the seminary. Then the heroic Father Stock suddenly died. Take another example of one whom Christ chose out of the world. It was on the 2nd of November 1950. Our man is Father Emile Capone, a 35-year-old United States Army chaplain, a Catholic priest from a farming village in Kansas. It is the thick of a firefight during the Korean War. Father Emile made a decision that led to his death by starvation. The American forces were overrun by Chinese soldiers outside a crossroads town called Unsan in North Korea. Lighting forest fires to frustrate United States reconnaissance planes, the Chinese surrounded the Americans and pressed in, attacking with small arms, grenades and even bayonets. Meanwhile, Father Emile gathered the wounded in a dugout shelter made of logs and straw. When the American officers ordered the able-bodied to retreat, Father Emile refused to leave the wounded. As the Chinese soldiers began lobbing grenades into the dugout, he negotiated a surrender. Father Capone had several chances to get out. Warrant Officer John Fernston later told a Catholic priest who collected accounts of Father Capone's actions in Korea, but he wouldn't take them, he said. His capture and forced march northward with hundreds of other American prisoners was merely the beginning of Father Capone's trial, an ordeal that ended in his death from starvation, from cold, from lack of basic medical care at a prison camp in North Korea 6 months later. The church has named Emile Capone a servant of God, the first step towards possible sainthood, and has opened a formal inquiry into whether he merits consideration for canonization as a saint. When he sailed to Korea from an occupation base in Japan, he was a physically fit, hardy priest with rugged good looks. Those who knew him remembered him as a man's man who loved the rough army life, enjoyed bowling and talking sport with the lads, and who cared deeply for the young men under his care, be they Catholic, Protestant or Jewish. He was a strong, holy man, and he was very determined to do what the bishop wanted him, to help the boys, said his sister-in-law Helen Capone. The point here is that he and Franz Stock were chosen by Christ out of the world to belong to him, and precisely because they belonged to Christ, they dedicated themselves to those in the world and its misery. These two men may be taken as examples of how the world profoundly benefits by revealed religion. They were chosen out of the world by Jesus Christ to belong to him. By contrast, what was the result of the work of Marx and Engels, who lived in the world and belonged solely to it? The result was the plague of 20th century communism and forgetfulness of the individual man and woman amid the tides of ruthless decisions. It was Marx and Engels who sought the pie in the sky. Theirs was the opium that turned the heads of too many people. Others in various ways had preceded them, and others still will succeed them. Let us take heed of the lessons of history and of the timeless words of Jesus Christ. He is the answer to the needs of man. Let us belong to him then.